has years of experience in conflict transformation, NGO leadership, and social change education and activism, as well as a lifelong commitment to building strong people-to-people relations across conflicts. Educated in Jerusalem and the USA, Huda is the first on-the-ground regional director of the Alliance for Middle East Peace. Do we call it ALLMEP or ALLMEP? Yeah. A network of more than 100 civil society organizations working in the Middle East among Palestinians, Israelis, Arabs, and Jews. Previously, Huda worked as a teacher, trainer, and consultant for the Palestinian Ministry of Education for 15 years. Please welcome Huda to the stage.
Masal khair, assalamu alaikum. Good evening, everybody. And I love the tradition that you guys all start with, which is the recognition and acknowledgement of the people who lived on this land for thousands of years. And in that spirit, I want to acknowledge the presence of my partner in crime, Ronit Zimmer, who is, without her, I wouldn't also be here, and without Rozana, I wouldn't be here. This is my first time in Australia, and I love it, you guys. So God bless the place that gives its people a reason to thrive and be resilient. And this is exactly why I am here. I am one of the privileged in Palestine. I get an access with my Palestinian travel document to places that not many Palestinians can go to. But I'm here today, and I'm carrying many voices with me. But one of them that I'm very proud of is that we need everyone in the world to stand by the Palestinians and the Israelis who want to stay on the land rather than leave the land. The Palestinians need everyone to stand by them, to continue to be resilient, to continue to thrive, even in the most difficult times, but most importantly, to be able to raise their children in a place where they can give their children a future. If we leave Palestine, there will be no Palestine or Palestinians. With all the respect that I have for the Palestinian diaspora all over the world, it pains me to know that sometimes they are divided on Palestine and Israel. And as a Palestinian and as a woman, I have to go through all kinds of layers of oppression on a daily basis in order to make it to the place I work at. I urge every one of you today to stand by me, to stand by the thousands of Palestinians and Palestinian women who are fearful of losing their children. If we lose children of Palestine, we lose Palestine. The maiden age in the West Bank is 20 and in Gaza is 16. They've seen no peace. They know no peace. And every time they get a chance to leave, they leave. I don't want my 33 nieces and nephews to leave Palestine. I want them always to know that they are Palestinians and they have the right to live in Palestine. And my way of doing that, taking that sense of responsibility, is to liberate myself and in the process liberate the oppressor. This is what Paulo Freire, one of my education gurus that I studied, said, that the greatest humanistic and historic task of the oppressed is to liberate themselves and in the process liberate the oppressor. And that's a lot of power given to people always being told that they are the victims and they only should embrace victimhood. The Palestinians are not victims. The Palestinians are survivors. They are strong, proud people, and they deserve peace. And I'm here tonight in order to make sure that you are all standing by us wanting peace. There is no shame of being a peace builder. As a Palestinian, as a Muslim, and as in former lives being Christian and Jew, because I live in the place where all it started, and I have no conflict with any of those values, I urge you to stand by the Palestinians and by the Israelis in their journey to be liberated. we are still in that desert trying to find a way out of it. And I'm one of the people who are trying to contribute to that through working with Israelis in order to support the resiliency and the steadfastness of the Palestinian people. Thank you so much for coming tonight, and make sure that anything I say is communicated the way I said it. Remember that I have to go through borders, through Dubai, through Jordan, through Israel, through Palestine, and I am a tough woman, but I need help when it comes to being smart. Thank you so much. Yes, it. Thank you.
Huda, that was amazing. It was so wonderful to hear you speak from your heart. Thank you so much. Thank you. And the panel discussion is going to be so interesting. I now introduce our other two panelists, and I ask them to come and take their seats up here, please. Professor Timothy Lynch is the Professor of American Politics and Associate Dean International in the Faculty of Arts at Melbourne University. Tim holds a PhD in political science from Boston College in the USA, and he's twice a Fulbright Scholar. I actually didn't know you could be a Fulbright Scholar twice. So, he's written several books, including one on the conflict in Northern Ireland, and has had articles published widely in several newspapers. It's amazing what you can find out on Google. I found that articles in the publication The Conversation, you've had over 1 million hits. Not a bruise to show for it. It's not a good word, is it? It's not a peaceful word to say hit. I've never actually thought about that before. I'm going to ask Tim to speak in a moment, and immediately after Tim has spoken, Ronit is going to just say a few words. Ronit Zimmer was educated in Melbourne and Jerusalem and has been the Regional Director for Project Rozana in Israel since 2020. Previously, she was the Department Director at the Peres Centre for Peace for 5 years, where she managed partnerships that brought together young people from the Mediterranean basin, including the West Bank, Gaza, Jordan, Tunisia, Turkey, and elsewhere. Tim's going to now speak to us about the Northern Ireland context, and Ronit will immediately after, I'm not going to get up and introduce you again, Ronit will speak about Project Rozana. After they have spoken, we're going to have a panel discussion with questions from the floor. So start thinking about your questions, and I will tell you afterwards how we're going to organise that. Timothy, I believe as soon as you start talking into your microphone, the technician's going to have it working.
Thank you very much, Chris. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an absolute pleasure to be here on such a terrific panel in front of a very high caliber audience. I come from a city called Melbourne, where it never rains, and so I'm from Melbourne, delighted to be here, and I'd like to thank, I'm always flattered by an invitation to speak, and I want to acknowledge Rotary International, who have wined and dined me for all my time in Australia. I've been here a little over a decade, so I've got very positive connections to Rotary and to Project Rozana that I'm new to. I'm delighted now to be part of their outreach. So I'll just do a couple of things, because I know we're very keen to hear from my panelists who have real on-the-ground experience of this region in a way that I just don't. I'm a scholar of the Irish peace process, and particularly how the United States provided some keys that unlocked that very ancient enmity, and that's really the angle I'm going to come at in our conversation this evening. I'd like to offer some provocations and then see what we think. So first of all, I'm often asked this: how far is Northern Ireland a model for peace elsewhere? Very seductive argument. If you can find, if you can bring Republicans and Unionists, Republicans and Loyalists, Catholics and Protestants together and form government through engaging in the works of peace, well, then you can market that to other conflicts. Very, very seductive model. And I don't believe it, or I believe it only with some significant qualification. So let me first say just a couple of things of why Ireland might be appropriate, and then I'll tell you why I think it probably isn't. Well, first of all, it worked because, and it shares this, I think, to a degree with Israel-Palestine, there was important outside intervention. So the United States, most obviously and most clearly, played a role in unlocking a conflict which neither Dublin nor London was able to play. Very important role by Bill Clinton. Remember Bill Clinton? It's in some ways his signal foreign policy achievement. A lot of his legacy has been questioned, and the expansion of NATO, that legacy is being played out now. But Northern Ireland stands preeminent in his legacy. It will be after, unfortunately, Monica Lewinsky appears in his obituary, Northern Ireland will at least be in the second sentence of that obit. So, and we know America has the capacity to play a decisive role in peace processes elsewhere, not least in Israel-Palestine. We can argue about whether America has played that role well. But there I think, there's an important similarity. I think the acceptance that the terrorists, the freedom fighters, the men and some women of violence deserve to get out of prison to make the peace process viable and possible is a model that Northern Ireland set. A highly imperfect one, and that still rankles. But prisoner release on both sides was a way of solving an entrenched legal part of the Northern Ireland situation. And that has some potential to be mimicked and copied in peace processes elsewhere. The political process worked. And we know all peace is subject to politics. Northern Ireland had left and right wings. It had pro-British, pro-Irish positions. These are all reflected and refracted through the other peace processes ongoing in the world, from South Africa to the Middle East to Myanmar to Ukraine. So there I see some similarity. And yes, cultural commonality is terrifically important. And here Northern Ireland's contribution, I don't say this lightheartedly, but Northern Ireland has Guinness. You know Guinness, that wonderful dark drink? And my experience, and I worked very closely with the men and women engaged in the peace process, what you found was that and this was remarked to me by a senior US official who was party to these negotiations, that they would spend all day arguing about land and rights and history. But in the evening, they would all drink Guinness and they would sing rebel songs. There was a kind of unity they felt. There was a commonality that came from that shared experience, which I think we see on the stage this evening in the Israel-Palestine conflict. So for all these reasons, I think there are several others, but Northern Ireland does represent some path to hope. It is a model that could be mimicked and emulated. But I also think, and this is what I think is more likely to be the case, that Northern Ireland is just too historically specific, too different, too discrete, to be easily mapped and modelled onto Israel-Palestine. Not impossible to do, but I think ultimately you'll find more difference and a lack of applicability. And I'll very quickly, let me explain what I think those are. Well, first of all, if you tried to copy Northern Ireland, what you'd be saying in Israel-Palestine is we must empower the extremes. Forget the middle. Forget those that have spent their careers dealing with compromise and moderation. We will empower the DUP, the Democratic Unionist Party, the staunch, most unionist pro-British party in Northern Ireland. And we will empower Sinn Féin, the most staunch anti-British Republican Party, and we'll forget about the middle. And we'll hope for the best. So we've had in Northern Ireland, over the last 20 years, now 24 years, this bizarre scenario where the leaders of the two parties who define themselves in opposition to one another, whose careers are built on the hatred of the other party, have to be in government together. Now, I don't think, so in an Israel-Palestine context, what would that mean? It would mean Hamas and, well, what's our most stereotypically anti-Hamas party? Is Israel-Palestinian. Likud even would be in alliance together with Hamas, and that you would trust that they would just get on. And it didn't work perfectly in Northern Ireland, but it worked, I think, much more than we might expect it to work in Israel-Palestine. Maybe three very quick points. It's also worth pointing out, I think, and I've got huge respect and admiration for the women that sit to my left and their efforts at being practitioners of peace, not just talking the game, but being on the ground and playing it. And I'm a scholar. I read and I write. I don't get down and dirty in the way that my fellow panelists have. But even allowing for that, I think in Northern Ireland's case, we got peace less because of peacemakers, they were important, more through sheer exhaustion. The two parties had, the fathers were now seeing their sons taking up the Armalite, assuming these entrenched positions, and they started to ask themselves, this is not working. That sheer exhaustion, the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, which prioritised the killing of Crown forces, British forces, actually found their greatest enemy was loyalists, who killed them back, and vice versa, and on it went. So they weren't waging a neo-colonial struggle. They were waging wars against neighbours in neighbourhoods they then had to share. The sheer exhaustion of doing that and it not working brought people to the table. My second to last point. And here I'm being a bit more. I'm not sure about this, but a DUP councillor said to me, I remember him posturing on this. He'd been to Israel-Palestine. And I said, well, yeah, what's the difference between Israel-Palestine and the situation you see in Northern Ireland? He said, oh, well, in Israel-Palestine, they really hate each other. In Ireland, Northern Ireland, there is this notion that it's a kind of role play they're engaged in. That, as bad as it gets, they'll always have Britain, they'll always have London, or always have Dublin to play some sort of mediating role or to bail them out. Whereas Israel-Palestine, the stakes are so much greater. They are existential. We're talking about the existence of two states, or the non-existence of two states. We're not talking about that in the Northern Ireland case. And my final point, I'm sorry, I'm having longer than I claimed I would have. The important thing to recognise is we talk about the Irish peace process or the Israel-Palestine peace process. The process is the important part, not the peace. Peace presumes gradual, slow progress to the end of conflict. It's linear, it's unfolding, it's almost inevitable. And we forget the point is the process that locks participants, former competence, into it in such a way that they become more engaged in defending their positions within a recognised process than they do through violence with their opponents. The process is the peace. So we shouldn't be hunting for the sunny uplands of normality and peace and progress. What we want is both parties to be locked inside a bureaucratic structure that makes conflict much, much harder to imagine. I think the European Union is premised on the same notion. How do you stop Germans killing French and Italians killing Spanish, and on it goes. You lock them into a large bureaucracy where they're competing over fishing quotas rather than over land. And that, I think, is Northern Ireland's great contribution. But it takes recognition that it's a process that causes the peace, not a peace which is inevitable. I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Hi. And Tim, I have to say, I really understand what you say about process. And I feel privileged to be in a process with Huda, because you truly inspire me. I have to say, every time you speak, I understand you more and I understand me more, and you really move me. So we are in a process. We talk about peace with governments, but we're not in a process with governments. We're in a process with people. And Project Rozana is all about human-to-human involvement, Israelis and Palestinians getting together through health, improving outcomes for Palestinians, improving and strengthening and making steadfast and robust their health system. And I think the best way for me to describe Project Rozana is really to share a story about one of our projects that has been given a big hug by Rotary. And we thank Rotary for this wonderful project that we are implementing this year. So in December last year, we brought together 10 Israeli physicians and 10 Palestinian physicians to undertake an advanced trauma course. 2 days at Wolfson Hospital in Holon, just outside of Tel Aviv. In Israel, the course is mandatory for all physicians, for all residents. In Palestine, not only is the course not mandatory, it's inaccessible. In Israel, the course is generally run off an army base. So we took it off the army base, we put it inside Wolfson Hospital, and we brought together the 20 residents who worked together over the 2 days, who socialised together over the 2 days, and who will join a regional hub of physicians in trauma working together. So that was the pilot. This year, in 2022, we have 5 more courses, so we're talking about another 100 Palestinian and Israeli residents, all working in trauma. So you're talking about surgeons and anesthesiologists and whatever, there's a range of other physicians who will be joining our regional hub of 120 members, and who will be able to continue, once they've undertaken the course, continue to communicate and consult in real time through a dedicated app that is part and parcel of the project, to really create sustainable relationships and sustainable communication between the physicians. And I'm really proud of this project because not only does it, upskill both the Palestinian and the Israeli doctors, it provides an opportunity for them to get to know each other and for ultimately continue to work together. And just a further piece of this nice Project Rozana story. I was in Hebron a few weeks ago, and we were meeting with the staff of the head of the hospital, of ALLMEP hospital in Hebron, and 2 other surgeons. So I was sitting opposite an orthopaedic surgeon, and he was telling me that he's going to be joining the first ATLS course that we're doing in May. And then after he does the course, he's then joining the instructor's course. So what happened? The pilot was so successful that the ATLS in Israel decided to implement an instructor's course and invite Palestinians to join the instructor's course. So I was sitting opposite a surgeon who will then be able to deliver the ATLS course inside of Palestine. So here we're talking about that steadfastness and resilience that Huda was talking about. So not only are we engaging together, but we're working toward a resilient, steadfast, robust Palestinian health system. Thank you.
Thank you also, Tim and Ronit. Now we're going to move to a panel discussion, and the reason I've got my phone here is not because I'm expecting a message from the outer world, though they'll probably turn up, but because there are people on Zoom that are going to be sending in questions in the chat box, and they're going to be relayed to me through my phone. So if you see me looking at the phone, it's for a very good reason. But we also want questions from the floor, please. And I'm using the word questions, please, not statements. I was a school teacher, and I've been nicknamed the headmistress, so I will limit anybody or cut down anybody that is going to make a strong statement. If you have a question while we're talking, please move to the microphone so that I can just indicate left, right, or right, left, and allow you to ask your question. But I'm going to come back to my seat, but while I'm moving back to the seat, Huda, you actually reacted to Tim's comment about a one state. Could you elaborate on your reaction, please?
First of all, you studied at Boston College. I worked there for 4 years with the Irish Institute there.
What was it, the Irish Institute?
Oh my good, maybe I saw you.
What year were you there?
2002 to 2006.
Oh, I see, I'd left by then.
I missed you.
Oh, great.
First of all, the Irish model is fascinating to me because I taught at the University of San Francisco for 7 years comparative conflict analysis, and the Irish conflict was one of them. Don't judge me for being taught in the United States, just the master's degree, I got it there. But then I taught for 7 years at a Jesuit school, God bless them, about how important to learn lessons from other conflicts. And the Irish conflict itself and the apartheid South African conflict also was very interesting for us because of the way people engaged in that. I'm not going to give up on leaders. I'm working now in order to be able to get leaders in the future. But now there are at least 80% of the Palestinian youth who don't believe that the two-state solution is going to work or viable. But of course, we cannot say that. US aid money will not get to our pockets if we say that. We have to support the two-state solution. But we also, as a community, need to listen to what the youth is saying. So the Irish model is giving that a chance. Now, when it comes to peace building, the model that was amazing for us and we've learning from is that the people in Ireland got exhausted 12 years before the leaders got exhausted. And they actually started at the time getting the international community to pay attention to the fact that they want to do something. And it started with women who lost their children to that conflict and didn't want to have their children losing their lives for a conflict that the leaders are keeping it for other reasons than what people want. And 12 years of investment at that time in numbers was $30 per person per capita per year, was invested in building a constituency for peace. So when George Mitchell came and the Good Friday Agreement was signed, there were people who are actually, supportive. In our case, in the Israeli-Palestinian case, we had Clinton. We didn't have Guinness, we had hummus. The guys would meet and talk, and then they will kill each other while they are talking across the table, but then they will go and have hummus and they talk about their children and grandchildren, etc., etc. And then Clinton came to the picture and made them shake hands and the South Lawn at the White House, and Oslo happened. And people were, okay, if this is what the leaders want, great, we will have a state, the Palestinians. The Palestinian kids who were angry and throwing stones in the first Intifada, sent the Israeli soldiers with olive wreaths and flowers. That was unimaginable. I am a first Intifada person. I was at that time. And I had friends being killed in front. I saw the guns going out of their brains in the middle of the street without doing anything. I saw people being killed in their homes. As a teenager, I was thinking, where would be the best hiding space? And I was sure that we will be killed. For years, I felt crippled. And I hated my mom and dad because they didn't do anything to help us. And then the first Intifada happened, and we started realizing who we are and why is this happening. I was 14 years old when I knew what the Palestinian flag looks like. And I hugged it at night, and I cried because I recognized who I am. I think one of the things that happened to us in Oslo is that acknowledgement piece that the Australians are so proud of. We are not even yet there. After years of Oslo, 25 years of Oslo, and nothing happened on the ground for the people to feel that there is peace. So I guess we turned, as people who don't know how to kill other people, the peace-building community, we turned to investing in people-to-people. Sometimes people-to-people is very, very charged, so I call it peace-building because it's beyond people-to-people. And it's the only investment that we have as Palestinians and Israelis to co-resist together the systems that want us to be apart. It's the same piece of land. We have to find a way in order to coexist on it. So that's why the question is existential, and I agree with you. But does the world, or is the world ready for a scenario like the Irish scenario where Hamas will sit with Likud party and run the government? If they are ready, I think there are 80% of the young Palestinians who are willing to engage in a conversation about one state where they will have to do a civil rights movements in it in order to have equal rights. But at the moment, this is not the case when it comes to the international community. This is something we really need to think of in terms of the limitations we, the people on the ground, are going through. And that's why I look at you guys. In one state, two states, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, this morning we lost 3 Palestinian children, and yesterday we lost Israelis, and we have 6 families now are bereaved from both sides. And I think this is where our energy should go. Number 1 step in peace building is to stop the violence. And I think this is where we all can put our energy and encourage the leaders and encourage the people to continue to seek life rather than death. Thank you so much, Tim. That was really amazing. I think I've learned so much about the Irish model. I still love the Irish people, all of them. It doesn't matter Catholics or Protestants. The executive director is a Catholic married to a Protestant, so one day, who knows? Thank you.
Fine. No one's come forward to the microphone. Please, no, come and stand and line up at the microphone, please. Yes, it should just come on if you talk into it. Yes, there you go.
Okay, lift it up like that. Okay. Sorry, I'm learning. You had me in tears. Ahla sahla. First, I'm going to make a statement, but it's not a strong statement. The statement is, I'm a Palestinian living in Australia. I enjoy free healthcare, friends from, all different kind of nations, religions, backgrounds, etc. I can go to Melbourne. I don't need a passport. I don't need a habiyya. I don't need anything. Yeah. Okay. What I want to say, sorry, I'm scared to talk in front of people. What I wanted to say is it's not my job, or it shouldn't be up to me whether you as a Palestinian should be okay with being able to get help to get to a hospital across. So don't take my question as if it's it's not an okay or not okay. You're living it, I've lived snippets of it when I've visited, and it's been horrible, and they're just snippets. You live it on a daily basis. So my question is this. Project Rozana, whilst I understand it's a good thing, people talking on the ground and civilians talking to each other, how is that helping Palestinians in Palestine when we're talking about places like Sheikh Jarrah, Salame district, people in Al-Khalil who can't go across the road, the apartheid that's happening? How is that going to help those people?
Good. It ended up a good question after a statement. Thank you. Okay, I think, Ronit, you might like to start with that one.
Yeah, so, look, Project Rozana is not a political organisation, right? We have a very specific mandate, and our mandate is to bring Israelis and Palestinians together through health and to, you know, facilitate better access to healthcare for Palestinians. So while we do not engage in the Sheikh Jarrah struggle, we do make sure, or we do our best, right, to provide healthcare. So if there are Palestinian children who need to go into Jerusalem, we do our best to work and get permits to make sure that they get there free of charge. We facilitate projects. I can show you on my phone, we've been doing the last couple of days training of community health workers from remote communities in the West Bank. Now you're talking about Area C, so I don't know how political we want to get tonight, but Area C is an area where both Palestinians and Jewish settlers live. Okay, I can drive out there. It's hard for Huda to leave Area C, right? What is very difficult, and it is the result of the conflict, it's also the result of cultural issues, transportation issues, government issues. Women and children have limited access to healthcare. So the project, and I'm really proud of this project that we are developing, we are training now women from the communities, women who have trust in the communities, in teams, holistic teams of healthcare providers, nutritionists, psychologists, physiotherapists, nurses, all in primary healthcare for women and children. So the last couple of days they've been at Sheba Hospital, which has a Women's Innovation Health Centre. They are being trained in the use of remote care devices. We are going to capture the data that will understand the level of health for women and children in these remote communities, and we're piloting 3 communities, a Bedouin community, a refugee camp, cluster, a village cluster just outside Dura, where Huda is from. We will be able to understand the level of health, we'll be able to understand the level of health at the cohort level, and we'll be able to share that with the Palestinian Health Ministry and as well with the Israeli Health Ministry, and hopefully together we can begin to ensure healthcare for everybody in Israel and Palestine, but particularly in Palestine, and particularly the most disadvantaged people, the women and children in Area C. So while we shy away or we do not get involved in political issues, we do our best to provide health services for the most disadvantaged, and particularly those vulnerable because of the conflict.
I think, Huda, you need to make a comment as well.
Yeah, a quick one. I don't think that what we are doing is going to liberate the Palestinian people or bring peace to the Palestinians and Israelis. I would be crazy if I claim something like that. I just know that this is what I need to do at this moment in order to support the steadfastness and resiliency of the Palestinian people. I know that a doctor who gets trained, he's not like, there's no lack of talent when it comes to the Palestinians or brilliancy. The doctor who gets training in Hadassah has the potential to treat a settler from Kiryat Arba'a, who that settler would not even acknowledge the fact that Palestine existed or Palestinians exist, but he is treated by a Palestinian doctor from Hebron, who got the permit from the Israeli army to go through a checkpoint to go and work in Hadassah. To me, this is what liberation means, that doctor is contributing to that. To me also, a doctor who gets training in Hadassah Hospital comes back to Al-Khalil, Hebron, and in one day he is to see, and according to statistics, he's to see 20 to 50 patients a day. And that's, to me, resiliency and steadfastness. I cannot resolve the whole conflict. The only way for me is to get rid of the leaders on both sides, but I cannot do that. I don't have the power to do that. I do have the power to invest in the now, so in 10 years, we will have different kinds of leaders. That's my responsibility. And also my responsibility when there is an infant coming from Gaza to be put in an incubator in Augusta Victoria Hospital in Jerusalem because he needs it. And the Israelis don't give his mom a permit to be with him, and they send his grandfather with him. And that kid is alone in the hospital, and he needs to be breastfed. An Israeli Orthodox mom comes and breastfeeds that kid. To me, that's what makes the difference. That Israeli woman is not going to be the same person after that. And that kid will know that one day he had the milk of an Orthodox Jewish woman. And in Islam, you know that you become like, she's your mom, and her daughters and sons are your brothers and sisters. To me, this is what makes a difference now. I cannot stop the killing of Palestinians on a daily basis by Israeli army who don't know to assess security-wise whether this person should be killed or not. This is happening randomly because of all the reasons in the world, because there is occupation, there is military occupation. I'm not denying it, I'm not normalizing it. I am just trying to find a way for the Palestinians not to leave Palestine, for the Gazans to have clean water to drink. That's it. And maybe God will intervene. Maybe she will listen to us at some point and intervene.
Thank you. Now, gentleman here, I believe, and unfortunately, the bright light is right in my eyes, so I can't see if the hands are up. So you will have to come forward to ask your questions, please.
Thank you very much.
It might be helpful if you just say your first name, and if you represent an organisation, it would be helpful to the panellists. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. My name is Philip Feinstein. I'm from different leaders settled and solved. And how can that be used as an example for the Israeli and the Palestinian leaders? Because there's a lot of disagreement amongst them as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's an excellent question for which I'll suggest an answer. I think it's worth reminding ourselves that both these conflicts that we're looking at and comparing this evening exist within democratic structures. So it doesn't mean, it's not an argument that they are both perfect democracies, but it's hard to imagine a more democratically rambunctious, fractious, multi-party system than Israel for such a tiny population. There is the rule of law, there are rights, there is religious freedom, and of course I accept these are hardly perfect in their implementation and recognition. And many of those same traits, and there's without getting too controversial, there is also a common British beginning or British stopping point that caused a lot of problems for both these conflicts. But Northern Ireland as well is a democratic system, trapped between two other democratic systems in Dublin and London. So my response to you is, and Ukraine, Russia illustrates it really rather well, so I'm glad you've raised it. Democracy is meant to be ruled by law, not by men. It's meant to work when you've only got grey leaders that don't have egos. And when you do have those men and women that present themselves within democratic structures, the democracy finds them out, either through term limits or because they lose elections. The problems in autocracies, and of the kind that Israel is surrounded by, ego is everything. bravado is everything, because there's no checking power on that kind of rule. So it's to the huge advantage of citizens within both of these peace process situations. They inhabit democratic structures. That I think needs to be built into our assessment of the quality of the leaders that all the systems in these two areas throw up.
Thank you. You've made me think, Tim, and I'm going to throw it to the panellists. Is democracy the answer to worldwide peace?
What else have we got? Well, sorry, I don't mean to jump in, but what's your alternative? I mean, it's the least worst system. I'm not sure that it's comparatively new in the course of human history, and the Americans have been at it for 24 decades. It's comparatively new as a force. We know Israel is an ancient and yet young country that has democracy in its inherent structure. I don't know what the solution is. I need to be able to get rid of the bastards, I suppose, is my issue. And democracy gives you that. It gives you huge inequalities and it gives you huge imperfections. But it's the least worst way of working through these issues.
I guess I just would ask the question, what kind of democracy? Because we have different models of democracy. And if it's imposed by certain systems that doesn't work in collective societies, then I would say no. I studied restorative justice, and then when I was studying it at Eastern Mennonite University, God bless the Mennonites also, I was like, this is the tribal system. This is how tribes, when they get involved in a conflict, would sit in a circle and start talking and finding someone to represent the victim and the aggressor, etc. And it was like, why are they calling it a new science? People have been practicing it ages ago. I think it's important for us to understand that each conflict is totally different from the other, and what kind of the kind of democracy that works in Europe may not work in the Arab world. Lebanon is one of the countries that we always thought that it's democratic because of the different representation of different sects, but it could be also the problem. So I think the key word here is law and order, and how people grow respecting that kind of law and order, and knowing that they are not entitled to kill someone else in order to get their own rights. It's basic sometimes, basic human interaction based on respect, mutual respect, and recognition and acknowledgement of the other people's rights.
Ronit, do you want to comment or not? No? Okay, Father Patrick.
I don't have to give my name now, do I? From the Columban Centre for Christian-Muslim Relations. My question is, how do we deal with the neuralgic issue of the language, the accusation and the refutation, language of apartheid? Thank you.
Very good question. One of the big issues within the peace-building community now is that terminology that is being used by us for a long time about peace-building that doesn't make sense to the Palestinians. Because you have rights and justice and, and it's not practiced at all. And we could use the word apartheid. And according to some of the Palestinians, they didn't even want to call Israel as an apartheid, not because they are normalizing the occupation, because they think it's not fair to the South African model to be compared to the Israeli model in terms of discriminatory systems. So we need, this is the effort that we are engaged in as Palestinians and Israelis. We need to redefine all of that from a Palestinian-Israeli perspective in order to be able to express our views about these things. I have to say sometimes, even if I'm supportive of one argument over the other, I cannot embrace one over the other because there are legal consequences for that. And again, I am someone who lives in the conflict. I cannot make a statement about it. I live it. I live it. I know that I cannot get on certain buses. I know that I was born in Jerusalem. I cannot have an access to Jerusalem without a permit. I needed Ronit's help in order to get a permit to fly from Ben Gurion. And it was easier than going through Jordan, I have to say. But that doesn't mean that I acknowledge the existence of the occupation at the moment where I am crossing crossing different checkpoints. I also was taken away to be searched. But it happens to me in Dubai. It happens to me in Jordan. It happens to me in Europe. The British did not let me in after I got the visa. For 45 minutes, they were questioning whether I had some weapons on me. Because I am different, because I look like someone, I'm not white, I am a woman. My name has Muhammad in it, so that in itself is dangerous. So I would go beyond just the case of Israel and Palestine. The whole world is going through, it should go through some sort of reform when it comes to discriminatory language. And as a feminist, I see that on a daily basis.
And would you like to comment about language, and did it have an impact in the conflicts you have studied, or does it?
I think it's a very interesting question, and I stand to be corrected on this, but I think Northern Ireland is the last conflict in which native English speakers are killing one another. I think I'm right in claiming that. I stand... Yeah, so there is there's something about Northern Ireland that makes it a very attractive... There are more books written on Northern Ireland. I think again, I'll stand to be corrected on this if somebody wants to do a search. There are more books written on Northern Ireland than any other conflict. And part of the reason is, well, first of all, it's a conflict between English-speaking peoples, and English is a large language of scholarship and analysis. It's also very easy to study it in a way that the West Bank and Gaza just ain't. You can go and stay in a nice hotel, the Europa Hotel, I recommend it, it's a lovely place to go, and then you can hire drivers to take you to the conflict zones. Americans do that. I mean, not ridiculing Americans here. I'm married to a very important one. But you could choose to kind of fetishize the conflict because you're not subject to it. The only American killed as a consequence of the Northern Ireland conflict was a shopper in Harrods, a department store in London, killed accidentally when the IRA blew them up. The difference with Israel-Palestine is it has huge spillover. There are Islamists that claim, Osama bin Laden claims Israel in his long manifesto of grievance against the Saudis and the Americans and infidels all over the world. But centrally for him, a mobilizing cause is Israel-Palestine. Northern Ireland has none of that character at all. People don't feel threatened by the Northern Ireland conflict. They think in some ways it's kind of not cute. They think it's kind of, though the Irish, you put two Irish men in a room and they will have you put two Irish men in a room and they'll have 5 different arguments. So there is something nostalgic. There is St. Patrick's Day in the Irish context. And it captures that nostalgia for immigration and this kind of fetishization of Irish culture. There's nothing similar on the Israel-Palestine side. This is a conflict which mobilizes global forces, terrorist forces. There is a Munich 1972, there is a 9/11, which makes it much, much more difficult, I think, when we speak about common peace processes across both of them.
A question over on the right, and then I think you've got a question.
Thank you for this this wonderful presentation. My name's Richard Fusi. My question is, in talking about democracy, how do we even start when democratically elected organisations like Hamas or the Brotherhood in Egypt are just put to the side, just disregarded when it doesn't suit us? How do you begin in a peace discussion when there's such an imbalance of power? How do we have this discussion without acknowledging the geopolitical influences around it and the influence of money? And how do we even begin to fix this problem when all I see are middle-aged men who only know war and hate? We need to empower women in this discussion, the women who bury their children. How do we do that?
Thank you. I was actually going to ask a question, so I'm going to link it in about the role of women in...
You want me to start? Well, look, I get the argument that if only the children could take over, or if only we empowered more women, the conflicts would end. And I suppose I share the aspiration. I just don't think it's borne out by the evidence. So in both these conflicts, let me speak about Northern Ireland where I'm on firmer ground. Part of the remaking of the conflict, which we've seen intimations of, are by youngsters. So it's now skipped a generation. We've had relative peace for 30 years. And now 18, 25-year-olds, 30-year-olds are thinking, well, what's the purpose? My identity means I should mobilise, I should act. So the recurrence of the Troubles is coming through youngsters. And I'd also observe on the gender question, gender questions are never capable of easy resolution. There are as many staunch women that have been consequential to the stoking of the conflict in Northern Ireland as there has been women marching on the behalf of peace. I think Israel has a very strong record of the same phenomenon. There is nothing uniquely peacemaking about women and nothing inherently warlike in the behaviour of male politicians. It depends on the positions they adopt. So this hoping for a change in demographics, I think, is not borne out by the evidence of history.
Ronit?
I thought that the first part of Richard's question was very interesting about the parties that are not legitimate in the eyes of the international community, yet they have been democratically elected. I'd love Tim to respond to that. How are they involved in a peace process?
It's the problem with democracy. Once if you have a democratic system and the people elect people you don't like, or elect people that use democracy as a means to some non-democratic end, I think that is the problem of all democratic politics. It's one that Northern Ireland has experienced particularly frontally. The IRA had the very explicit strategy of the Armalite and the ballot box. We will win political power, but we'll do so through the implicit or explicit use of force. And now, how does a democracy deal with that? How does it police the men and women who adopt that position? It's really extraordinarily difficult. I don't have an answer beyond the hope that there isn't. What is the alternative? What do you do in the absence of a democratic system? If being less democratic is your solution, I start to become sceptical.
Supplementary question. Who is the problem for? For the people who elected that unpopular group, or the problem for the West?
Well, I suppose I need an example there. I don't think Israel-Palestine is better the less democratic it gets. But by the same token, I recognise that Hamas's strength in West Bank and Gaza comes from its electoral hold. So I'm sceptical that Hamas have the keys to peace, but I also recognise they have a democratic mandate. So how do you reconcile those two things?
I have to argue against your argument about women. And the example that we are learning from in Palestine is the Liberian example, and in which we had women taking down between 2003 and 2007 one of the worst warlords in Africa, in Liberia. And not only taking him down, but also bringing a better system of governance and law and order, and getting Liberia to be on the map, economically speaking. I think also there is a potential, the potential has already got on the road in Palestine and Israel. On March 27, a group of 4,000 Palestinian and Israeli women signed an agreement that they will not shut up or stop until our leaders bring us some sort of stability and peace. And I don't think that women have the same kind of ego that men, sorry, I'm not otherizing against you guys. You are also victims of the same systems. But you also need to realize that women don't have that ego when it comes to survivorhood and preservance. It's not just about them, it's about the community in general. And I'm afraid that so far the world has failed us more and more, and proved that we need some sort of change when it comes to the gender of the leader, but also we need some change in the way the leadership models are used. We failed as women to produce a leadership model that is not imitating the male model, because that's the only model that we've known. But I'm sure that there is out there in the world a model that can work for all of us. And the model that I will vote for is the grandmother's model. I stand on the shoulders of my grandmothers who did not learn how to write and read, but both of them insisted, against the will of everybody, to send their kids, daughters first, to education, because in their mind, 1948 Nakba happened because we're not educated, although at the time my grandfather was a graduate of Oxford. But still, they thought that we didn't have enough education and we didn't have enough women educated. And that's why in Palestine now, women are 65% of the higher degrees, masters and PhDs in Palestine. And I think this is going to make difference at some point. We had many leaders in the Palestinian struggle for liberation. One of them is Hananashawi. She was not persecuted by the occupation, I have to say that. She was persecuted by our own. First of all, because she's a woman. Second of all, because she wanted to break out of Fatah. And third of all, because she's Christian. And you know, not acknowledging the fact that the Palestinian story is also a Christian story. By the way, the evangelicals in the Congress did not know that Christians existed in Palestine. And I maybe some of you have known the story already, but I spent a whole day with an evangelical Republican who's an evangelical. Nothing against them, God bless them also. I spent the whole day with him because the staff at the embassy called me and they said, we're not spending the whole day with him, you are coming and answering his questions. Everywhere we went, he asked people if they believe in God, and people, you know, gave him different answers. And then his conclusion was, you know, the Palestinians and the Israelis will not have peace, or don't deserve peace, actually, that's what he said, because they don't believe in God. But he was also one of the people that I continued talking to him until he signed the bill that is called the International Fund for Peace in Palestine and Israel. A Republican who made his best to create an alliance with the Democrats, and it was the only thing they agreed on. So there is a way to do things. I know they are not massive, and they will not change policies, but slowly they will. The fact that the US aid now is giving money to programs that doesn't necessarily have an object of dialogue only is a move beyond what we expected. Because at some point, the federal money was only dedicated to 20 Palestinians and 20 Israelis sitting in the room and acknowledging the fact that they love hummus. But at the end of the day, it didn't leave the room to do action. And we are in a stage where we have the dialogue moving beyond the dialogue itself to actions like Rozana and Eco-Peace and Hand in Hand and Taghir and all of the 160 organizations that I'm part of. I think we are small, but we are serious. And we are also, as women and men involved in the peace building, don't have ambitions to change the dynamics, but we are determined to. And in that sense, I encourage every one of you to do what they can do, what he or she can do in order to support that, even if by just praying to whatever God you believe in.
Thank you. And question from the floor, then. I'm actually getting some questions on my phone, so, well, I'll go to one or two on my phone and then I'll ask you. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jade. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I have a question regarding a statement that was thrown around a lot on, I'm a university student. Last year on social media and on campus, the statement is actually really simple. It was thrown around a lot, and I just wanted to know your feelings on that statement and how you would think the best way to respond to it is. Thank you. The statement, it's simple, regarding the Israeli-Palestine conflict.
Oh. Do you mean the statement is, it is
yeah,
simple?
So on social media we saw a lot of, it's really simple, there's a perpetrator and a victim, there's an aggressor and a victim, and people were really simplifying the conflict in a range of ways. But that was, I guess, the headline statement, that the conflict itself is simple and that any attempt to dramatize it or any attempt to explain it in any lengthy way was inadequate and a way to get around it rather than facing what it was.
I would love to know more.
Yeah.
Sorry, the statement is that the conflict is simple.
It's simple. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is simple.
And sorry,
would love
where was
to know
it? That was on Australian social media, was it?
Yeah, on a lot of social media, largely regarding the fact that it was alluding to Israel being
The aggressor
and Palestine.
Oh yeah, in that sense, yes, it is. It is simple. You know, you have an occupation and you have an occupied, but in between, since 1948, there is much more to that, and that's why one of the things that I want to convey here tonight is that it's not simple. It's really not simple. There are two dominant narratives that the international community is judging us based on them. But in between, there are layers of other narratives that we dismiss them completely. And that in itself an action of aggression. So I wouldn't say it's simple. I wish it was simple, but I don't think it's simple. And I think it's important for you guys to realize that you know, a day in an Israeli woman like Ronit and a Palestinian woman like me is not simple. It's far from simple. I wish.
I agree.
I wish. So my argument, yeah, it could be simple from your point of view, which is 360-degree or something there. Point of view, but if you are on the ground, it's not. You need to navigate all layers of oppression. The Israelis are also going through certain degrees of oppression. I work with women in Israel, and I know that in some refugee camps in Palestine, their lives are much better than these women in Israel. So I cannot actually say that it's simple.
So I guess I'll rephrase my question. I'm Jewish. My grandfather was born in the British Mandate of Palestine. He spoke Arabic as readily as he spoke Hebrew, and that's a big part of my identity and my history. And so for me, when people say it's simple, it's not. I guess my question is, how do you, for people who aren't interested in having a deeper dialogue and discussion further than the statement, it's simple, how do you engage with those people?
Okay, that's, yes. Now I can see where you're heading.
Yeah.
Okay, Huda or Tim, I'd actually like your feeling on this.
If things were simple, Jade, I'd be out of a job, because my job is to examine and explain complicated things. It's also, let me suggest, a particularly pernicious part of left-wing politics. that they do reduce things to simplicities, to binaries, to class war or gender war or oppressor and oppressed or settler and colonized. And it ain't true. The world is much more complicated, and the insistence that Israel-Palestine is in some way can be understood through this very black and white lens, I just think is just absurd. And unfortunately is indicative of a style of approach which too much of the thinking left are falling for. We were talking earlier, Ronit and I, the interesting part of life is in the grey zones. You fall in love in the grey zone. You have proper dialogue in the grey, not in the black and white zone. So I just, this binary thinking I have a real problem with.
I think also the part that has to do with acknowledgement, sorry, Habibti, you guys here practice that sense of acknowledgement every time you want to start an event or an activity. I think it's important for us also to know that we need to acknowledge the fact that there were Palestinian Jews before 1948. There is no harm of acknowledging that. They actually lived in Hebron. But we have also to acknowledge the fact that we have been practicing this dismissal game for a long time. And guess what? We didn't throw the Jews in the sea, and they didn't kill us all. We are still here. So I think if people want to approach the conversation from a simple point of view, yes. We're trying to push each other to the sea, but the sea is not accepting us.
Now,
Did you want the gentleman in the middle there? Did you want to add to this? Or?
I have an observation. Do you operate in the grey zone to be successful by keeping your head down?
Okay.
No. Myself, no. Because I'm a brave, courageous, empowered woman who don't need empowerment. By the way, I hate the word empowerment. We are strong. Yes, we are strong. I don't shy away from it. Again, I say with full lung and full heart, there's no shame of being a Palestinian peace builder.
Ronit, and then I've actually got a question for you. So.
Okay. No, what I wanted to say is that the situation and the conflict is not simple, but what is simple is to do what Huda and I do, which is chat and become friends and get to know each other. That is simple.
Thank you. Well, you might have sort of answered this. I've just got this question. Ronit, what attracted you as an Australian to move to Israel and work in peace building, and what gives you hope for the future when there's a good reason for many to feel pessimistic? Now, that's a good question sitting here in Sydney.
Okay. So I came in 2002, which was right in the middle of the second intifada. I came with my Australian partner, now husband, and we decided that we needed to come to Israel and be part of what was going on there. And for me, my contribution was always going to be in the peace building field. I mean, it is part of who I am probably since I was a teenager. If I think about every paper that I wrote at school and at university, it always related to Israel, Palestine, making peace, our joint history, our common future, women within the realm of Israel-Palestine. I'm not pessimistic, right? I can't be pessimistic because I have 3 children who will grow up as Israelis, likely join the military, right? Depending on whatever they do, but it is likely that will happen. One has already received her first call, you know. She's a girl, so she's unlikely to be in a combat unit. She's unlikely to stand outside of Dura, Huda's village, and check permits. But she will likely have to do something else, right? Whether it's, you know, working with other Anglo-Saxon, lone soldiers. I can't be pessimistic because my future and Huda's future and our children and Huda's 33 nieces and nephews are going to grow up here. So we need to be resilient and we need to have hope.
Thank you. Question?
name is Ben. Thank you to you all for such a fascinating presentation, really very meaningful and very illuminating in so many ways. My question is mainly to Tim. I know very little about the Northern Ireland conflict. That's its proper name, or a name for it. And I took some notes, and I noticed that you mentioned exhaustion as a factor that contributed towards peace there and might also be a differentiating factor. And then a sort of subsidiary question would be maybe to Huda. You mentioned the word resilience and steadfastness quite a lot, and I was curious if you could discuss that with Tim concerning the relationship between those concepts and exhaustion.
Do you want to go first?
Oh, Ben, it's a well-put question. So you're asking, to clarify what you've asked, exhaustion as applied to Northern Ireland in comparison to Israel?
From you, I'd love to just understand how that operated better, because I don't know anything about the conflict. And if you could sort of tell the story and sort of through your analysis as a historian, and then if you could engage maybe in some conversation, moving context to Israel-Palestine concerning steadfastness.
That's good. Sorry, it's my old brain, not your very good question. Yes, so exhaustion is the situation that Northern Ireland reached in the middle 1990s. That's nearly 30 years of conflict. And when I say it's a low-level conflict, Northern Ireland, I mean, it has huge resonance, and the Troubles has a huge poetry and history wrapped around it. But the actual numbers of those being killed, in comparative, I mean, a tragedy for the 3,000 that died as a consequence of the Troubles. Of course, a tragedy, but in comparative terms, that's the opening hours of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I mean, it's small fry if you compare it to the Syrian civil war or to Libya. But the exhaustion came from the fact that the initiation of the conflict, and of course we argue in the same way we do in Israel-Palestine, who initiates it. The initiators of the conflict, let me suggest, were the Republican movement, those that were anti-British, wanted a united Ireland, and they determined to fight a war against what they called the British occupation of Ireland. The 6 counties of Ireland are called Northern Ireland, a statelet that has no legitimacy. But some of the language is very like the way some Palestinians would address Israel, an illegitimate state imposed for reasons of political expediency. So the aim of the Republicans and their confident expectation is that they would fight British soldiers who are easy to demonise. They're the jackboot of British oppression and colonisation. It fits their narrative. What they discovered was the real resistors to that campaign wasn't the British state. British state wants rid of Northern Ireland as a problem, same way Dublin does. The real resistors were the loyalists, the working class men and some women who for reasons of identity, resisted this Republican onslaught and started killing them back. And by the end of the middle 1990s, both sides had realised they couldn't kill each other and realise their goals. And that's where you reached exhaustion. So it wasn't some newfound kumbaya, tambourines, let's all make peace. It was our interests, our identity is better secured if we just recognise we can't eradicate the real opponent. And our real opponent is our neighbour, not the British state. And that's where the exhaustion comes from. Now, how you apply that to Israel-Palestine, I'm going to leave to...
And quickly, I think we all get our moments of exhaustion. We get a moment of feeling down and desperate. But then we wake up and we know that the only way to be in Palestine and to stay Palestinians is that steadfastness and resiliency. This is what gives us hope, and this is why we are junkies for hope, because this is the only way for us to continue not feeling exhausted to the extent that we live. We, the people, cannot afford be exhausted, because that means the end of us. Given in to despair, and that's it. We kill each other, and we kill each other as Palestinians. And we had, you know, it's it's important to acknowledge the fact that the structural violence that is practiced against us is also internalized. And we are in a moment where we had moments where we killed each other. And I think this is where we need to feel that wake-up call, the slap on the face, and again, go back to our success story in the entire struggle, which is steadfastness and resiliency.
If it's related to it, yes, please.
Very much related. Just a super quick follow-up. Thank you to you both for your wonderful answers. So, Tim, you were describing a situation towards the end of your response whereby people realised that their enemy was not so much some state or a jackboot of a soldier, but actually their neighbours. Yeah. And they got sick of killing each other, and they recognised that they couldn't eradicate each other. Yeah. And so that exhaustion was actually a virtue. I'm just curious, doesn't that sound like a panacea here in Israel-Palestine, whereby people could recognise that the enemy is not a state, that they're killing each other, and that if they stopped for a minute and recognised that it might be impossible to eradicate the other, that there could be some kind of peace? It seems like a very analogous sort of concept.
It's a very good point, but it took 25 years of killing each other to reach that point.
It's been 80 years beyond, you know.
Well, yes, depending on where you started, but from 69 to 98, the period of the formal period of the Troubles, exhaustion took decades to be recognised, and that's the problem.
But my point here is that the Israel-Palestine conflict has been quite a lot longer, one would argue, by most metrics.
Yes. Have they, or are they reaching exhaustion point? I'll defer to experts to my left on that.
I think that we've got another linked, is it? No, sorry, yeah. This gentleman, is this linked to this? Yes.
Yeah. So my name's Stuart. So 1988 is probably in the Palestinian Liberation Movement. 1988 was the year, because PLO started in 1964.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
So from 1964 to the 70s, the PLO took, its strategy was armed resistance, and its strategy was just not annihilation. In 1988, after decades of armed struggle, they realised they could not defeat Israel militarily. So they accepted the two-state solution as one small step towards Palestinian liberation. So my argument is 1988 was that year of exhaustion, which goes to Ben's point. The problem is, and this is the generational thing, the old fighters, okay, were tired. The mothers were tired. They didn't want their children to have to go through the first intifada. The problem is the second intifada, okay, that was the next generation. And so they'd lost sort of, I guess, the connection with Israelis, which Palestinians from the 80s, you, as an Israeli, you could go to West Bank, you could travel, you could have hummus in Ramallah and all that sort of thing. I won't speak anymore, but
thank you.
I hope it's clear. So 88 was a period of exhaustion.
Yeah, we are getting quite close to our finish time, and this lady is ready to ask her question.
I'm a believer in education being important, and Together for Harmony would be one example, particularly looking at the young people. Huda, you talk about respect and understanding the narratives and things. What steps in both sides of the situation are really being made to educate about both narratives and getting rid of this idea of hate, because hate is probably the most destructive force that we have around. So the role of education, the role of hope in our future generations, because if they're being taught to hate and to kill at the extremes, we go. Yeah.
That's a question very dear to my heart, and it will be our last question. So Ronit, and then Huda.
I want to say that in addition to hate, I think apathy is also a big issue, right? Because let's say I was invited to speak at my kids' high school last year, and they said, oh, just, you know, and I said, oh, you know, I'll talk about peace and we'll talk about solutions. And then, no, go back. They don't know anything about the conflict, right? Now you're talking about a high school, prominent high school in the middle of Tel Aviv. The kids are 15 and 16 and they haven't learnt about what's been going on with their neighbours. So I think apathy, we need to get over the apathy and we need to engage in the narratives. We need to understand where we come from. I need to bring people like Huda into the schools inside of Israel. I need to go and speak, and my peers need to go into the schools inside of Palestine, and we need to share each other's narratives. And we need to get to know each other beyond the, soldier-civilian dynamic that, is often depicted and exists today.
I would add also the role that the media is playing by labeling, by using these big statements about what this group is teaching hate and the other group is teaching peace. I take this question very personally because I was part of the team that was the first team to create the first Palestinian curriculum after Oslo. And I worked on the English curriculum. And it was heavily monitored by the donor community. The map, we couldn't use the map of Palestine before 1948 because it's a disputed issue on the negotiation table. I have issues with the educational system in Palestine that has to do with gender and freedom of speech, and also some notions that is not universal when it comes to the preservance of the earth. But I don't think that I contributed to teaching hate through the educational system. There were groups that were commissioned, paid a lot of money by the donor community in order to study both and analyze both the Israeli and the Palestinian curriculum to get evidence of hate in both. That's the level that I worked on when I was with the Palestinian Ministry of Education. As part of the peace-building community, we are the place to teach multiple narratives, to teach values that has to do with life and dignity and justice and peace and partnerships on equal foot. There's a chance for us also to revive stories of women in the Bible, in the Quran, in the Torah, because they have been dismissed. There is a chance for us to start rethinking history away from politics, bringing back some of the stories about living and existing together rather than dismissing. These are the efforts that I'm engaged in on a daily basis. I am a product of the Jordanian curriculum. We didn't have a Palestinian curriculum before 1997. And my friend in Ghazi is a product of the Egyptian curriculum. And we both didn't see the word Palestine mentioned in any of our history books. We studied European history, which was, by the way, bloody and more violent than any other conflict I've witnessed myself. We need to be cautious when we make statements like that.
Professor Tim, do you want to make a comment on education?
Oh, well, only I have a vested interest, of course, in people seeking an education. But even in Australia, education is, and always has been, a highly political issue. So if we think about how we're still having history wars, which often take place in school classrooms, certainly in university classrooms, over white Australian guilt or the oppression of the displaced indigenous population. These are not settled questions. And we argue about them. And educational establishments which take only one side and dismiss the other are as, let me suggest, they're problematic here. And I transpose them to a more incendiary environment. Homer Simpson said alcohol was both the cause but also the solution of all our problems. The same is true of education. How do you correct the problems of education? You have more and better education. And you make access to education much more universal. A challenge I still think that much of the Arab world has to confront. Illiteracy rates among Arab women are the worst in the world. That needs correcting. So education is a cause of problem, but also one of the great solutions.
Thank you. I'm going to invite Dr. Jamal Rifi to come to the lectern to give a vote of thanks on our behalf. And while he's walking out, I actually want to thank all of you for being respectful listeners and your questions. Thank you so much. I'm going to say a little bit more at the end as well. Dr. Jamal Rifi, I feel I know you because I saw you on Australian Story. It was an excellent program. I know you do amazing work out here in the community, and thank you so much for everything you do.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the COVID hotspot of the Canterbury Bankstown. We've been a hotspot for far too long. We've been in lockdown for far too long. And talking about leadership, Carl asked for his counsel and showed a lot of leadership during COVID and right tonight. So, Carl, thank you, mate. Also talking about COVID, we in Project Rozana in March 2020, when we realized that Australia was short of intensive care unit ventilators, we discussed the issues and we thought, gee, if Australia is short of intensive care unit ventilators, how the situation is going to be in Palestine? And we managed, when COVID hit Palestinian, Israel, Lebanon, and the rest, and when the intensive care unit were worth their weight in gold, we managed to send from Australia in May 2020 the first of 32 intensive care unit ventilators to the Palestinian hospitals in everywhere. We don't know, but we sent them. We managed to get them there at a time when nobody had any COVID intensive unit anywhere in the world. We managed to do that. And for this, during this pandemic, it meant a lot, but we weren't able to do this if it wasn't for people like you who are actually sitting here listening and supporting us through what we are doing. Finished from COVID right now. One thing is actually I've noticed, if I was in Tim's shoes, I would have sat in the middle. Because I will have one angel on my right and one angel on my left. So, to the three of you, thank you for a thought-provoking, enlightening discussions. And I just now, behind the microphone, I'm going to make some statement. I always knew for every complex problem, there is always a simple but wrong solution. But one thing I just learned tonight, that I found out why the Irish process worked and why the Oslo process did not work. Because at the end of the day, they drank the black Guinness. At the end of the day, they ate the white hummus. So my advice will be that probably the next process, which is going to come, that probably I'll advise them to drink the black Arabica coffee. On behalf of Project Rozana Board, Australia, I thank you for being here tonight. And also I thank people who are watching us through our streamline, no matter where they are. Your time is valuable, but your contribution is even more valuable. Being here is important, listening to us is important, because the main ingredient is actually we need to change mentality. We need to change approaches, and at the same time we need to provide hope. And there is a lot of hope in the area that we call the Israeli-Palestine conflict. There is a lot of work being done there. So we hear the highlights, but there is a lot of things being done quietly and locally, and it makes a difference. So thank you all for being here. Thanks all our speakers on my behalf and everyone else's behalf, and we thank you if you are at home, but mainly I'm going to say, God bless you. Assalamu alaikum. Tasbah ala khair.
Thank you, Dr. Rifi. It's just my role to thank a few other people too, particularly Mayor Karl Asfour for making us so welcome and providing us with this amazing venue. To Ron Finkel, the Chair of Project Rozana International, for being the leader to bring us all together today. Yuri Vint and Dash Lawrence from Plus 61J Media for the work they put into the organisation. The staff here, Karl, at your centre, I understand from Dash, have been superb in making the arrangements, so please pass on our thanks. And to Jeremy Wright, District Governor for District 9675, and the members of the Rotary Clubs that helped to make today possible. Thank you so much. Don't forget, if you see someone with a little round badge and you'd like to join Rotary, speak to them, please. And please, we've got a few minutes at the end. If you'd like to talk to the same person that you spoke to at the start and reflect on what you perhaps have learnt tonight. I found it one of the most amazing evenings that I have attended in a long time. So my thanks to you, Huda, and to Ronit and Tim as well. And please all travel home safely. Thank you.